Today I'm going to show you how to knit a ballerina doll using a circular knitting machine. I knit this doll for my daughter's ballet teacher. Balancing motherhood with running a small business is challenging even during normal times. But this last year I've watched in awe as our local ballet studio adapted and got creative to keep their students dancing the entire year, even setting up dance classes outside in the fresh air. So I wanted to make something to show how grateful we are, and I figured what better way than to knit a ballerina doll designed to look like her teacher. I'm going to show you every step of the process today, but if you'd like to support the channel, you can purchase a printable download and template of the pattern linked in my shop below. It will include the full pattern and instructions, as well as a blank template which you can use to sketch out and design your own doll. This ballerina measures approximately 11 inches tall by 3 inches wide. In terms of timing, it took me about 20 minutes to knit the doll, 20 minutes to assemble, 25 minutes to add the facial and body features, and about 15 minutes to make the skirt, for a total of approximately an hour and 20 minutes. That being said, we all go at different paces, so project time will vary from person to person. If you make this project, please tag me on social media when you share your work, at Diana Levine Knits on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Pinterest. I have lots more fun, quick and easy patterns coming soon, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date when I release my latest videos. And if you'd like to check out my knitting machine books, templates, and patterns, visit DianaLevineKnits.com. The techniques I'm going to walk you through today include casting on and off of a knitting machine, assembling a knit doll, adding body and facial features, knitting a doll skirt, and hand knitting a bow. All the supplies I'm using today are linked in the description below. For this project, I'm using an Addi 22 needle machine, but you can also knit this on the Sentro 22. For the skirt, I'm using the Addi 46 needle Express Kingsize machine, but you can also switch this out for the Sentro 48. I'm knitting with loops and threads impeccable yarn in the colors chocolate brown, soft rose, and soft taupe. You'll also need stuffing, embroidery thread or black yarn, a hair elastic, a crochet hook, a darning needle, and a pair of scissors. I'm also using a knitting tag, and if you'd like to hand knit the bow, a pair of size 7 US needles, although you could easily swap this out for a crochet hook. Step 1 is to knit the doll. To knit this doll, we'll follow the template starting with the hair and work our way down to her feet. Then we'll reverse direction and work our way from her feet back to her hair. We'll begin by casting on to a 22 needle machine using the hair color. In many of my patterns, I start with scrap yarn, but for this project, we won't be using any scrap yarn. Cast on directly with your first color, which will be the hair color. Wrap your yarn around the first needle, and then weave the yarn back and forth along all the needles until the end of the row. When you finish the row, place the yarn into the tensioner. Hold the yarn in your hand to provide tension. Turn the knob to begin knitting. Start slowly for the first couple of rows, and then you can start to pick up speed. Knit 22 rows for the hair. When you finish 22 rows, cut a short tail around 5 or 6 inches in the hair color and throw it in the middle of the machine. Switch to the yarn you're using for the face. Put the 2 yarn tails together in between the same needles and hold them close and low as you slowly begin to knit your next row, making sure that the first few stitches are caught. Knit 11 rows for the face. After each color change, after about 4 or 5 rows, tie a quick temporary knot between the 2 previous yarn tails. Don't do a double knot because we'll come back at the end to finalize the knots. Just one quick knot is great. When you finish 11 rows, switch to the yarn color you're using for the shirt. Knit 14 rows for the shirt. When you finish the shirt, switch to the yarn color you're using for the legs. Knit 12 rows for the legs. When you finish the legs, switch to the color you'll be using for the ballet shoes. Knit 10 rows for the ballet shoes. Next, we'll work our way back up to the hair. Switch back to the yarn color you're using for the legs. Knit 12 rows for the legs. When you finish the legs, switch to the yarn color you're using for the shirt. Knit 14 rows for the shirt. When you finish the shirt, switch back to the yarn color you're using for the face. Knit 11 rows for the face. When you finish the face, switch back to the yarn color you're using for the hair. When the work starts to touch the table, pull the knitting up inside the machine. Knit 22 rows in the hair. We're done knitting the body of the doll. Next, we'll cast off the stitches. Cut a long tail in the hair color and thread the tail onto a darning needle. Turn the knob to move a few stitches to the right. Identify the stitch where the yarn tail is coming out from. We'll begin picking up stitches with the needle directly to the left of that needle. For the first few stitches, pick up the stitches one at a time. After a few, you can start to pick them up 2 or 3 stitches at a time. Continue until the last stitch, turning the knob every few rows to advance the next stitches. Pick up the last stitch and then pull the work off the machine. Gently stretch out the stitches. Put aside the work for now and we'll come back to seam and assemble the doll later. Step 2 is knitting the skirt. Switch to a 46 or 48 needle machine. For the skirt, we'll be using scrap yarn to cast on. We'll be removing this yarn at the end of the project, so the color doesn't matter as long as it contrasts well with the skirt color. Cast on in the same way as earlier, wrapping your yarn around the first needle and then weaving it back and forth along all the needles until the end of the row. When you reach your needle again, put your yarn into the tensioner and hold it with your hand to provide tension as you begin to knit. Knit 5 rows in the scrap yarn. When you finish the 5 rows, leave a long tail in the skirt color and place the tail right next to the scrap yarn tail, in between the same needles. Hold the 2 tails close and low as you slowly begin to knit your next row. Knit 18 rows in the skirt color. When you finish the 18 rows, leave a long tail in the skirt color again and switch back to the scrap yarn. Knit 5 rows in the scrap yarn. When you finish, cut a short tail and continue knitting until the work falls off the needles. Pull the work out of the machine and gently stretch out the stitches. You should now have 2 pieces knit and ready to assemble, the main piece for the doll and the skirt. Step 3 is assembling the doll. Begin by turning the work inside out. You'll have lots of yarn tails from all the color changes. Secure each of the color change tails with a few good knots and trim the tails. As you work, check the outside of the piece to make sure that you're pulling tight enough that the stitches are close together, but not so tight that the stitches get bunched up. Then turn the piece right side out. Use a yarn tail from one of the sides, which will be the hair color, to cinch the top of the doll's hair together. Gently pull the tail, making sure to roll the work inside as you cinch. Thread the tail onto a darning needle and secure it with a few knots, capturing stitches from a few different sides of the closure. Next, push that closure inside the work to meet the other hair color section. This can be a little awkward to figure out the first time you make a doll, but just wiggle it around and you'll get it. When the 2 sides are together, thread the tail from the bottom inside the piece so that it exits at the top of the doll. When you have both tails together, use the exterior tail to cinch the top of the doll, again making sure to roll the work inside as you cinch. After both sides are cinched, tie a few good knots between the tail yarns and then weave in the tails to the center of the work, leaving the yarn tail between the 2 layers and trim the ends. Next, grab your stuffing and gently add it to the doll. Don't overstuff the doll or else it will stretch out the stitches. Add it slowly, a little bit at a time, making sure to push it around so it's placed evenly. I like to twist the doll in the areas I know that I'll be cinching later to make sure that I have enough stuffing in each area. After you finish stuffing the doll, thread a length of yarn in the shoe color onto a darning needle and thread it through the first half of each stitch all the way around the bottom until the end of the row. Then pull the yarn to close the feet. Tie the 2 yarn tails together tightly and weave in the ends to the inside of the work. When you're making a doll, it's really easy to hide the ends. Just thread them into the center of the work, pull the thread, trim it, and then wiggle the work to pull the tail into the center of the body. Our doll is assembled. Next is step 4, adding the facial and body features. First, identify which will be the front and which will be the back of your doll. Typically, you'll want to place the side that has the yarn changes on the back of the doll, since some of those stitches will likely end up looking a little off. First, we'll add the definition between the head and the body. Grab a length of yarn in the face yarn and begin at the back of the doll. Thread the yarn through the first half of each stitch and continue until the end of the row. I'll show you a close-up here of how I'm working the stitches. Then pull the yarn as tight as you can without breaking it and tie a knot on the back of the doll. Then bring the yarn around one time around the outside and pull it as tightly as you can. Secure it with a couple of good knots on the back and then weave in and trim the ends. Next, repeat the same process about a third of the way from the top to create the bun. Next, we'll shape the legs. Grab a length of yarn in the shoe color yarn and tie a quick knot on the interior bar to secure the yarn in the back. Then sew back and forth, starting from the center bottom until you reach the top of the shoes. Thread the yarn to the back, secure with a knot, and weave in the yarn tail to the center. When you reach the legs, switch to the leg yarn color and repeat the same process, continuing sewing up in a line to create the legs. Then secure the yarn with a quick knot in the back and weave in the ends. Next, we'll create the arms. Use the same process with the shirt color to sew back and forth on the side to create the arm segments on both sides. Next, we'll add the ballet slipper straps. Grab the shoe yarn color and start by securing the yarn in the back of the doll with a knot on an interior bar, and then thread it through to the front center. Then wrap the yarn around the leg and thread the needle under a bar on the side of her leg a little bit further to the back. Then thread back to the area we started, but make sure to go through a different stitch. Repeat the same process on the other leg and thread it back through the same area to the back. Then thread the needle up a few stitches and do the opposite wrapping, going from the top to the bottom, securing the yarn through an interior stitch on the side of the doll to keep it in place. Repeat on the other leg, and then thread the needle to the back, secure with a knot, and weave in the ends. Next, we'll add the facial features. I like to keep my facial features super simple in dolls, so I'm using black embroidery thread to create 2 eyes. When I'm done, I'll secure the embroidery thread in the back with a knot and weave in the ends. I'll repeat the same process again with the pink yarn to create a mouth. Our ballerina is starting to come together. Next, we'll move on to step 5, seaming the skirt. Assembling the skirt is essentially the same process as making a scrunchie. I'll show you the whole process here, but if you'd like to check it out in more detail, I'll link below to my video on how to knit scrunchies. Turn the work inside out with the V-shaped stitches on the inside and the bumpy stitches on the outside. Wrap a hair elastic around the middle. Line up the top row of main color stitches and use a crochet hook to go through the first stitch on the bottom. Then pull through the stitch above it. Next, pull through the next stitch on the top to the left. Then pull through the next stitch on the bottom. Continue in this pattern, pulling through loops from the top and then the bottom, and repeat until the end of the circle. When you get to the end, make sure to capture all the last couple of stitches and then tie a quick knot between the 2 yarn tails. Next is step 6, removing the scrap yarn. Your skirt will still have the scrap yarn from when we cast on and cast off. Begin to pull the yarn to remove it. One side will likely pull off easily. For the other side, identify the 1 yarn thread that runs through the top stitches. Remove it a few stitches at a time until the end of the row. Once that length is removed, the rest of the yarn should pull off easily. When you're done, secure the yarn tails with a few good knots and weave in the ends. Next, I'm adding a knitting tag to the back of the skirt, and I'll link below to the shop where I order my tags. Step 7 is adding the skirt. This step is very easy. Since we used a hair elastic, the skirt will be stretchy, and you can simply place it onto the doll. If you're planning to make a selection of skirts for your doll, like a dress-up doll, leave the skirt unattached. If you're only using one skirt, you can add a few stitches to secure the skirt to the doll so that it can't be moved out of place. Step 8 is optional, but it's a cute final touch, knitting a bow. You can create a bow for the doll in so many ways. You can crochet the bow, sew a fabric, you can use a store-bought bow, or you could even make it with a 22 needle machine. But for my doll, I decided to hand knit the bow. I'm using a pair of US size 7 needles. I'm using circulars, but straight needles are fine too. Cast on 10 stitches using the long tail cast on method. Then work in double stockinette stitch for 2.5 inches. To knit double stockinette, it's a simple repeat. Knit 1 stitch, bring the yarn to the front, slip the next stitch, and then bring the yarn to the back. Repeat until the end of the row for every row. When you get to 2.5 inches, bind off in the same pattern. Next, take a length of yarn and wrap it around the middle of the bow over and over until it's cinched, leaving 2 yarn tails on the back. Secure the yarn tails with a knot on the back of the bow. I want my bow to be removable, so I'm going to tie her bow in the same way I would tie shoes. But if you'd like the bow to stay attached to your doll, you can stitch it right into the doll to secure it with a needle. Our ballerina is done. If you make this project, please tag me on social media so I can see your work. At Diana Levine Knits on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest, Etsy, and Ravelry. If you'd like to purchase the pattern and template for this project, please visit the link in my shop below. If you'd like to check out any of my knitting machine patterns, templates, and books, visit DianaLevineKnits.com. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a like, comment below, and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date when I release my latest tutorials.